We can only regulate what we understand. This is a huge growth opportunity globally and where the UK can really differentiate itself. Our ultimate goal is to get the science that's now available to patients safely and effectively to help them live longer, happier lives.
Our coverage of Meeting on the Med in Rome is kindly sponsored by Solaris. I am Federico Cittrich, reporting for Onyx live here in Rome at the Meeting on the Med. Today we are having Lawrence Tallon, the head of the UK's top medical regulator.
So my name's Lawrence, I'm the Chief Executive of the MHRA, which is the medicines and medical products regulator for the UK. So it does very similar things to the FDA, although it doesn't cover food, and it does similar things to the EMA. So our job is to make sure that medicines, medical products, including technologies and blood products for transfusion in the UK are safe and effective. And we also, as well as licensing clinical trials and medicines and medical products, we also monitor their post-market effects and post-market surveillance.
The UK's new clinical trial regulations came into force yesterday, actually, on the 28th of April of this year. Is the first major overhaul in over 20 years. And you're promising faster, lower burden trials, including a 14-day route for phase 1. How confident are you that this will actually bring more trials to the UK? And what would you say to a US biotech assessing whether to run their first in a human study in Britain versus elsewhere?
Yeah, so we recognise that it's a very competitive global environment about where people are going to place their clinical trials, particularly their phase 1 clinical trials. And the UK has had a few years where it got behind the curve from where it had been pre-Brexit. And so the timelines for approving clinical trials had started to become too long for a period. I'm happy to say we're completely back on top of that now. So our performance is much better, faster, predictable, much more akin to the leading peer regulators. And in fact, there was an article published in the British Medical Journal a little while ago that showed that we're one of the fastest regulators for trial approvals in the world. However, we think we can go further and faster, and we know we need to be competitive in this global environment. And that's why we brought in this new set of reforms, which are some of the biggest reforms to UK clinical trials regulations in 2 decades. Faster for phase 1, also a new notifiable route for lower risk trials, so that they don't have to have national approval. They can go ahead, notified by the trial sponsor. It's about a fifth of the trials will go through that notifiable route. That allows us to spend our time and energy on the more complex clinical trials, which is why we're confident we can meet that phase 1 environment. So I think my message to US biotechs or biotechs anywhere is the UK is fast, getting faster. It's highly expert because of the quality of our science. We have a heterogeneous population with longitudinal whole population, multimodal data, and we're now very much open for business. And so I think we have a very competitive offer in the global ecosystem to bring first in human trials back to the UK.
We're in Rome at the Cell and Gene Meeting on the Med, so I wanted to ask also specifically about advanced therapies. The UK has historically punched above its weight in ATMPs, but manufacturing capacity, cost and reimbursement are increasingly choking commercial uptake worldwide. So what role does the MHRA want to play in making the UK a better place to develop, approve, but also, of course, actually launch cell and gene therapies?
So you're quite right, Federico. We have historically punched above our weight in ATMPs, but I think what we see now is this is a huge growth opportunity globally and where the UK can really differentiate itself. So we know that ATMPs at the moment have been a relatively small market segment. The limitation is no longer really the science. The limitation is the regulatory reimbursement system framework to get the science into those patients who most need these new therapies and who would benefit from them. So we see the UK being able to differentiate itself, particularly around ATMPs. And we're going to be publishing in the next month or so, this is around the middle of May, a new rare diseases framework, which will set out how we will lead the way in regulatory science for ATMPs. And this will look at things like bringing together the clinical trial and the marketing authorization to a single process rather than separate processes. It will look at things like leveraging prior knowledge, predictive knowledge, using in silico data and real-world data, basket trials, umbrella trials, and really creating a new regulatory paradigm so that we can get ATMPs to patients to market more quickly than before, and therefore make the reimbursement more achievable.
Lawrence, the international recognition procedure has been running for just over 2 years now, and the MHRA is due to launch a new international reliance framework for devices this autumn. Some observers argue that recognition is essentially rubber stamping FDA and EMA decisions. So, how do you respond to that? And what is the case for the UK being actually a genuinely independent regulator?
Well, so we are, without doubt, an independent sovereign regulator, and we will always take decisions in the best interests of the UK population. However, we've got to be realistic that a country of the size of the UK cannot possibly regulate absolutely every product, medicinal product, biological medicines, small molecule chemistry, health technologies, including AI as a medical device. We can't do all of those things entirely on our own unless we're willing to hold back the progress of those products into our market, into our patients. We don't want to do that. So we have to be comfortable with the fact that there are certain areas where we would recognise the decisions of peer countries. That might be the FDA, it might be the EMA, it might be other important partners we work with, such as Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland. But there are also areas where we will be the leader, one of the reference regulators, where other countries will rely on our standards, ATMPs being a crucial space where we see ourselves as the peer and reference regulator. So I don't see reliance and recognition as a weakness. I see it as a recognition of taking the best standards from other places, other countries where that suits our population, and also being an exporter of knowledge in those areas where we would be the leader in regulatory science, such as ATMPs.
The MHRA is also due to publish a new regulatory framework for AI as a medical device this year, and your AI airlock sandbox is now into its second phase. The FDA has approved more AI devices, but has also faced criticism for inconsistency, while the European Union AI Act is viewed by many as a brake on innovation. So where does the UK want to land, and can you realistically regulate AI models that update themselves in real time?
You certainly can regulate them, but it needs a different model of regulation. And just as I said in some of my earlier comments that we see ourselves as a leader in ATMPs, we also see one of the other key areas of differentiation for the UK as regulation of AI as a medical device. And that's why we've initiated a really large evidence-based inclusive process that we call the National Commission on the Regulation of AI. And this is bringing together big tech, small tech, clinicians, academics, ethicists, patient representatives to design the optimal model for regulation of AI as a medical device. Now, we do have existing frameworks to regulate AI, but they are principally designed around radiology, image recognition. And in a world of LLMs and LMMs, we need a different paradigm of regulation for complex and adaptive products that do multiple things and that continue to change after the point of authorization. So we're designing the new framework for regulation, which we'll publish later this year, and we think that no other country has really cracked this. You made some comments about Europe and America. I won't necessarily comment on what other jurisdictions are doing, other than to say that when we look around the world, we don't observe any one country that's absolutely got this right. We think this is an opportunity for the UK to differentiate itself. That said, we're working very, very closely with international colleagues, particularly the FDA, because of course we recognise that medtech companies will always want to know what their bridge to America is. And so the US-UK pharmaceutical deal that was announced a couple of weeks ago, for those that were looking closely, they would have seen a byline in there that the MHRA and the FDA are going to work increasingly closely together towards mutual recognition of AI as a medical device. And this means we can say to medtech developers, AI developers, if you come and develop your products in the UK and you get MHRA approval, that gives you a clearer route to market in the US. So we think we can both design the model and we can also design a commercially viable framework, not only for the UK, but one that bridges to the US and indeed other major continental jurisdictions.
You're here, of course, among European CGT leaders and also the investors funding them. So what does a regulator come to a meeting like this to learn, and what questions are you also being asked most often these days?
It's really important for us as a regulator to be open-minded, to work closely with industry, investors, innovators, to understand the science that's coming forward. We can only regulate what we understand. And so regulation works best when we get upfront working really to understand the leading edge of science. That helps developers to de-risk their products because they know what the regulator's thinking and the questions they're going to ask. It helps us and our scientific assessors to know what's coming down the line and to be prepared for those conversations. So for me, this is about us learning, and for the colleagues we're talking to, it's about helping them to de-risk their regulatory pathway. What we don't want is a blind test that no one saw coming. We want that early, iterative engagement and dialogue. In terms of the questions that people are asking, I think particularly in this conference around cell and gene therapies, it is all about how we can redesign this regulatory paradigm that is primarily been built in all of the countries that we're talking about, Europe, FDA, UK, primarily built around large population diseases and highly prevalent diseases. You need a different regulatory paradigm for small population diseases and cell and gene therapies for rare diseases. And that's really what we're here to do. We're here to talk to investors and innovators and companies about how we are going to redesign that paradigm in the rare diseases framework that we'll be publishing in May. And also to learn how we adapt that, because this is of course a matter of consultation. Where we can make adjustments to that framework, we will of course do that. We're very open-minded. Our ultimate goal is to get the science that's now available to patients safely and effectively to help them live longer, happier lives. And in so doing, we will be able to promote the biotech industry in the UK and globally.
And finally, for the biotech investors watching us who are also deciding where in the world to put their money this year in 2026, what is your message about the UK?
Okay, so I think we have some really unique assets in the UK. We have world-class science, of course. We have 4 of the world's top 10 universities. We have an integrated health system that gives us whole population, life to grave, longitudinal data that is multimodal, including deep genomic data. We have a regulatory environment that is now pro-innovation, agile, that wants to work with developers to get products to patients, to market more quickly. We've just done, or the government has just done, a really important deal on the US-UK pharmaceutical front so that we can get the reimbursement levels up to the Western European average, so that the reimbursement that has been, we know, a barrier, is not going to be a barrier. As we've said earlier, we're redesigning the clinical trial environment so that we can have much faster, more predictable trial environment. And our overall mantra is that we are now fast as a regulator, we remain deeply expert, and we are open for business.
Thank you very much for your time,
Thank you, Federico.
for your insights.